What really happened in the JonBenét Ramsey case? What really happened in the JonBenét Ramsey case? Introduction: The Christmas Morning Nightmare. Boulder, Colorado, December 1996. A tableau of pristine snow and festive cheer, abruptly torn apart. JonBenét Ramsey, an ethereal blonde child of 6, was the radiant focal point of a pageant world, her winsome smile and sequined costumes gracing local television screens. She was the embodiment of an American Idol, an image shattered irrevocably in the pre-dawn hours of December 26th. What began as a terrifying missing persons report, a child vanished from her bed, a bizarre ransom note left in her affluent home, spiraled into a full-blown national nightmare with the horrifying discovery of her small, lifeless body in the Ramsey family's own basement. For nearly 3 decades, the JonBenét Ramsey case has remained a cultural touchstone, a chilling narrative of unresolved tragedy that continues to captivate and divide. Its intricate web of contradictory evidence, missteps, and competing theories has left a gaping wound in the American psyche, a testament to the persistent human need for answers where none are definitively provided. This investigation delves into the critical junctures, the forensic fragments, and the human frailties that have rendered the truth elusive, examining the stark divergences between the competing narratives. The crime scene and initial response, a comedy of errors. The events of that frigid Christmas morning unfolded with an almost surreal precision, quickly descending into chaos. Patsy Ramsey's 911 call, placed at 5:52 a.m., was the first tremor. Her voice, captured on the recording, oscillated between a frantic plea and a curious, almost rehearsed, urgency as she reported her daughter missing and the discovery of a ransom note. The nature of the call, with its focus on the note rather than the immediate search for her child, struck a discordant note for many. The note itself was a document of perplexing specificity and extraordinary length, 3 handwritten pages, composed on a legal pad found within the Ramsey home. It demanded $118,000, a sum that mirrored a recent bonus received by JonBenét's father, John Ramsey. Its arcane phrasing, unusual grammatical constructions, and peculiar instruction to not call the authorities immediately raised a multitude of suspicions, not least of which was the uncanny similarity to Patsy Ramsey's own handwriting. An intruder, it was reasoned, would hardly linger in a potential crime scene to pen such an elaborate missive. But the most damning criticisms of the initial response centered on the Boulder Police Department's handling of the scene. The crucial first hours, paramount for scene preservation and evidence collection, were marked by an almost unfathomable lack of protocol. Friends and family members were permitted to move freely throughout the house, their presence potentially contaminating vital forensic evidence. Coffee was consumed, surfaces touched, and the perimeter of a potential murder scene remained disturbingly porous. The grim discovery was made hours later, shortly after 1 p.m. John Ramsey, following instructions from a police detective, began a cursory search of the basement. In a small, rarely used wine cellar, obscured by a white blanket, he found JonBenét's body. She was bound, gagged, and her head bore the brutal evidence of a profound blunt force trauma. The pristine integrity of a potential crime scene had already begun to erode, casting a long, enduring shadow over every subsequent inquiry. The discovery of JonBenét Ramsey's body in the wine cellar stripped away any remaining pretense of a simple kidnapping. The narrative shifted abruptly from a missing child to a brutal murder, and with it, the urgent demand for an explanation. The initial impulse, often a default in such domestic tragedies, was to look outward, to hypothesize an external force, a malevolent shadow that had breached the sanctity of the Ramsey home. This became known as the intruder hypothesis, a theory embraced by many, not least by the family themselves. Proponents of the intruder theory pointed to several pieces of circumstantial evidence. In the basement near a door, a small window was found broken. A telltale cobweb, reportedly intact, initially cast doubt on its recent breakage, but the mere existence of the damage suggested a possible point of entry or exit for an outsider. Moreover, crucial forensic evidence began to emerge. Under JonBenét's fingernails and on her underwear, trace amounts of DNA were later identified that did not belong to any member of the Ramsey family. This unknown male DNA became a linchpin for the intruder theory, seemingly pointing an irrefutable finger at an unidentified assailant. The initial hours after the 911 call also yielded vague, unconfirmed reports of suspicious activity in the quiet, affluent Boulder neighborhood. A neighbor reported seeing a dark-colored vehicle parked suspiciously a few blocks away. Another spoke of lights on in the Ramsey home at unusual hours. While these sightings were never definitively linked to the crime, they fueled the perception that an external threat might have been lurking, waiting for an opportunity. The autopsy, conducted with the chilling precision of scientific inquiry, confirmed the grim reality of JonBenét's final moments. The cause of death was unequivocal: blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a severe blow followed by strangulation. The instrument of strangulation, a garrote fashioned from a paintbrush handle and a length of cord, was found tied around her neck. There was also evidence of sexual assault, a detail that deepened the horror and suggested a deeply disturbed perpetrator. The medical examiner's findings outlined a sequence of events that spoke of profound violence, a level of brutality that seemed incongruous with the seemingly peaceful domestic setting. In the wake of this devastating information, Boulder police cast a wide net, investigating a multitude of potential non-family suspects. Among them was Bill McReynolds, the local Santa Claus who had visited the Ramsey home days before JonBenét's death. His connection to the family, coupled with a bizarre, macabre letter he and his wife sent to the Ramseys after the murder, placed him under scrutiny, though he was eventually cleared. Another individual who garnered significant attention was Gary Oliva, a known pedophile with a history of sexual offenses against children, who confessed to being near the Ramsey home and having a connection to JonBenét, though his statements were often erratic and lacked corroboration. These and dozens of other individuals were exhaustively investigated, their lives dissected, only to be largely discounted as the primary perpetrator, or at least never definitively linked to the crime scene itself. Further anomalies found near JonBenét's body added layers of intrigue to the intruder narrative. A flashlight found next to her was speculated to be a potential weapon used in the initial blow to her head. Its presence suggested an item an intruder might carry or discard in haste. A suitcase and various boxes were discovered beneath the basement window, possibly used by an intruder to facilitate entry or exit. These small, disparate pieces of evidence, when viewed through the lens of an external perpetrator, seemed to paint a picture of a clandestine infiltration, a brutal act, and a swift, silent escape into the cold Colorado night. The challenge, however, was in connecting these isolated threads into a cohesive, undeniable truth. The challenge, however, was in connecting these isolated threads into a cohesive, undeniable truth. B. The autopsy findings, the unvarnished truth. The initial survey of the crime scene, chaotic as it was, provided only fragmented clues. The true horror, however, solidified in the sterile, fluorescent hum of the morgue. It was here, under the meticulous gaze of Dr. Michael Doberson, Boulder County coroner, that JonBenét Ramsey's final moments were meticulously pieced together, revealing a savagery that defied comprehension. The autopsy confirmed the unspeakable. JonBenét had suffered a severe skull fracture, approximately 2 inches long, on the right side of her head. This was no superficial wound. It was caused by blunt force trauma, a devastating blow delivered with immense force, significant enough to render her unconscious or even cause immediate death. But the horror did not end there. A white cord, fashioned into a garrote using the broken handle of one of Patsy Ramsey's paintbrushes, had been tightened around her neck. The deep ligature marks indicated strangulation, a separate, distinct act of violence. The official causes of death were blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxia by strangulation. Compounding the tragedy, evidence of sexual assault was also present. While there was no sign of vaginal penetration, there was clear evidence of perimortem, around the time of death, sexual assault trauma, consistent with an object being used. This detail, perhaps more than any other, amplified the terror of the intruder theory, painting a chilling picture of a predatory figure who had not merely killed, but defiled. The brutal reality of the autopsy findings lent a certain grim weight to the intruder hypothesis. Such a visceral, sexually motivated assault often points to a perpetrator with a history of similar deviancy, someone operating outside the perceived normalcy of the Ramsey household. It suggested a random, opportunistic act, a dark shadow slipping in from the margins of society, rather than an internal conflict. The violence seemed gratuitous, personal, and utterly devoid of the calculated restraint one might associate with a staged family cover-up. C. Suspects and red herrings, shadows on the periphery. With the horrifying details of the autopsy confirming a crime of extreme violence, the investigative focus initially broadened to encompass a range of potential external perpetrators. The Boulder Police Department, under immense public pressure, sifted through countless tips and interviewed numerous individuals who, for various reasons, became fleeting suspects or persons of interest in the labyrinthine early days of the inquiry. One of the earliest figures to draw suspicion was Bill McReynolds, the man who had played Santa Claus at the Ramseys' Christmas party just days before JonBenét's death. His unusual gift of a framed photo of JonBenét to the family, accompanied by a poem, seemed eerily prescient to some. His wife, Janet, had even sewn the dress JonBenét was wearing in the photo. McReynolds, a retired teacher, lived relatively close by and had a known affinity for children. While his eccentricities and proximity initially raised eyebrows, extensive investigation into his background, alibis, and forensic evidence ultimately failed to link him to the crime. He was eventually cleared, a prominent example of a red herring, a figure who fit a certain narrative but lacked definitive proof. Another persistent shadow in the intruder narrative was Gary Oliva, a registered sex offender with a history of child molestation. Oliva had been arrested near Boulder just days after JonBenét's murder. He had a documented fascination with little girls, had made bizarre statements referencing a child's death, and allegedly carried a small, intricate garrote. His confessions, often convoluted and unreliable, painted a disturbing picture, yet concrete forensic evidence directly placing him at the Ramsey home remained elusive. His proximity and disturbing profile made him a compelling, albeit frustrating, person of interest for many years, a phantom presence on the fringes of the investigation, never quite dismissed but never quite proven. Other less prominent figures, from local drifters to disgruntled former employees, were scrutinized and eventually cleared. The sheer volume of potential suspects reflected the wide net cast by investigators desperate for answers, and the intrinsic difficulty of isolating a single, credible intruder from a sea of speculation and circumstantial anomalies. D. The flashlight and other anomalies, tangible ambiguities. Beyond the explicit evidence of the garrote and the broken window, certain other items and observations at the scene contributed to the perception of an intruder's presence. The garrote itself, meticulously crafted from the paintbrush handle and a piece of white nylon cord, seemed too elaborate, too cruel for a spontaneous act of rage by a family member. The cord, in particular, was believed by some to be foreign to the Ramsey household, perhaps carried in by an assailant. Then there was the 3-inch Maglite flashlight found on the kitchen counter, close to the back door. Its placement was peculiar. Was it an intruder's tool, discarded in haste upon realizing the family was stirring? Or did it belong to the Ramseys, moved by one of them in the confusion of that morning? Its origins and purpose remained ambiguous, yet for those leaning towards the intruder theory, it represented another potential piece of the puzzle, a tangible item left behind by an unseen hand. Initial reports also mentioned the possibility of stun gun marks on JonBenét's skin. While later forensic analysis largely debunked the notion that these were definitively stun gun marks, the initial suggestion added another layer of sinister sophistication to the perceived intruder, hinting at a prepared, professional predator. These marks were eventually interpreted as post-mortem abrasions or bruises from other trauma, yet the early public narrative latched onto the stun gun detail as further proof of an external, calculated attack. These anomalies, coupled with the brutality of the autopsy findings and the lack of a clear family motive in the initial stages, built a formidable, if ultimately unproven, case for the intruder hypothesis. It was a narrative that resonated with the public's fear of the unknown, of evil lurking just beyond the threshold, threatening the innocent. Yet even as this theory gained traction, an equally disturbing counter-narrative was beginning to crystallize, one that turned the lens inward, towards the very heart of the Ramsey home. The sheet of paper, pulled from a pad in the Ramsey kitchen, lay flat under the sterile light of the police lab. Its words, precise yet strangely theatrical, spoke of a foreign faction, a ransom of $118,000. But the ink, scrutinized under magnification, told a different story than the one it tried to weave. As the initial chaos of December 26th began to subside into a grinding investigation, a counter-narrative, cold and unsettling, began to coalesce. This theory, uncomfortable and unwelcome to many, suggested that the horror had not breached the Ramsey home from the outside, but had instead originated within its walls. Central to this burgeoning suspicion was the ransom note itself. 3 pages long, meticulous in its composition, it detailed specific financial demands, $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, and peculiar instructions. "Don't call the police," it commanded, "or she will be beheaded." Yet the police were called almost immediately. Investigators soon noted the unusual vocabulary, the phrase victory. SBTC, which bore no clear connection to any known terrorist group, and the extraordinary length of time an intruder would have spent penning such a document inside a potentially occupied home, risking discovery. Crucially, forensic document examiners, particularly the initial FBI reports, found striking similarities between the handwriting on the note and samples provided by Patsy Ramsey. While later analyses would debate the conclusiveness of these comparisons, the initial findings cast a chilling shadow. The very paper and pen used were traced back to the Ramseys' own domestic supplies, reinforcing the sense of an intimate, rather than invasive, authorship. Adding to the unease was the perplexing lack of clear forced entry into the Ramsey residence, a sprawling, well-appointed home in a secure Boulder neighborhood. While a broken basement window was initially cited as a potential entry point for an intruder, investigators found a cobweb draped across its frame, undisturbed. There were no footprints in the snow outside this window, nor any other signs of a struggle or forced ingress at any other door or window. The house on the surface appeared locked down secure. The image of a sophisticated foreign faction, as portrayed in the note, seemed incongruous with an entry that left so few traces. The behavior of John and Patsy Ramsey in the immediate aftermath also drew intense scrutiny. Critics pointed to their initial reluctance to submit to extensive interviews, their swift engagement of attorneys, and their subsequent media strategy, which included television appearances and book deals, as signs that deviated from the expected actions of grieving, cooperative parents. While proponents of the intruder theory argued that their actions were a natural response to being unfairly targeted by the police, others viewed it as an obfuscation, a deliberate shield against transparent investigation. As the months turned into years, a more specific and deeply disturbing variant of the family involvement hypothesis began to gain traction. The theory involving Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's then 9-year-old brother. This theory posited an accidental death, perhaps a tragic outcome of a sibling dispute over something as mundane as food. The presence of pineapple in JonBenét's digestive system, consumed shortly before her death, became a key piece of circumstantial evidence. Burke had a known affinity for pineapple, and it was suggested that JonBenét might have taken some of his. The theory further contended that, in a panic, the parents, or Patsy alone, had then attempted to cover up the accident, staging the scene to resemble a kidnapping and sexual assault to deflect suspicion from their son and themselves. This staging, it was argued, included the elaborate ransom note and the creation of the garrote found around JonBenét's neck from items found within the house, a paintbrush from Patsy's art supplies, and a length of cord. The idea was that the crime scene elements, from the bound hands to the gag and the indications of sexual assault, were not evidence of an intruder's brutality, but a desperate, flawed attempt to mislead, a grotesque tableau constructed from profound fear and a desire to protect.